Hi friends, thank you so much for tuning in again for Reasons Podcast episode number 3. Today we'll be discussing on a very important Christian event that is probably the basis for our faith. And as we are about to enter into the Good Friday and Easter Sunday celebrations, we were just thinking that we would just put our thoughts on some of the important questions that people have been asking us as well. And today I'm joined by Dr. Balaji Bauro, who's the lead consultant of Reasons to Believe Asia Pacific. And today we will be, again, as I said, discussing a few important questions as we enjoy our cup of tea as well. And if you have any questions related to Good Friday or the death of Jesus Christ or the resurrection of Jesus Christ, you can always visit us here in our office in Mount Indial, Shillong. And if you want to contact us through our social media platforms as well, please do so, as we will put the various platforms that we have on social media. So, Dr. Balaji, when it comes to the death of Jesus Christ, we have various world systems that think that maybe the death of Jesus Christ was not a historical event, or it could have been, something that people in the first century made up. So, do you think that we have sufficient reasons to believe that Jesus actually really died on the cross?
Thank you, Zwana. This is a very good question, and I think even before we enter into the time of commemorating the death of Jesus Christ, which is central to our faith. And I think it is even more important to ask the question, if Jesus really died, right? And I think that is very, very important for us to consider. Now, very often you'll find that there are a lot of views that actually seems to suggest that actually Jesus never died on the cross, right? And then there are those who also are of the view that actually, even if he was crucified, he actually fainted or he was drunk. Now, there are different views, but irrespective of the different views that are available, and I think it is important for us to go back and look at the historical account, with regard to the fact that Jesus indeed was crucified on the cross. Not only that he was crucified, but he died on the cross, as written and as documented in the gospel accounts and even in extra biblical account as well. Now, this is one of the there are a few important lines of reasons that I would like to lay before the audience for us to consider the fact that Jesus died on the cross. Now, number one is that there are no evidence to suggest that Jesus was drunk. If you go to the gospel, you read in the gospel of Mark, chapter 50, verse 23, where it talks about Jesus was offered that drink, which was very sour, so I'm saying. And although he tasted, but he refused, basically suggesting that Jesus did not actually take any of that. So there is no evidence that seems to suggest that he was drunk. So that's number one. Number two, we are also told that, he was beaten, he was punished prior to that execution, prior to his crucifixion. He was beaten. And if you are aware of the historical narrative, you'll find that, the Romans had a very, a way of how they can punish a person. And in this case of Jesus, he was whipped, and there was profuse bleeding as well. And so as a result of that, there was so much of loss of blood that would have also suggest that, medically speaking, it would not be possible for him to survive. So I think that's the second reason. The third reason is when, the Bible also tells us that, a Roman soldier came to actually verify, remember, by actually taking a spear and piercing it on his side, and where immediately there was water, blood that followed, that flowed out of it. That is to confirm the death of Jesus Christ. And the other thing that they also do is that, according to the standard procedure of crucifixion, is that they would normally break the victim's legs in order to fasten their death. Now, in the case of Jesus at this very point of time, when they actually break the legs, and so this would cause the person to actually not be able to breathe, and because the lungs would be filled with carbon dioxide, and so ultimately they would slip and die. But in the case of Jesus, the Bible is very clear that, the soldier did not go on to actually break his legs. The reason being that he was already confirmed to be dead. And so that was very clear. And so the other important thing that you would also notice is that even if, let's say, Jesus did not die, as these views would suggest, now let's say that they brought the body down from the cross and then kept in the tomb, and then the tradition would say that they would actually embalm him with 75 to 100 pounds of spices. And you can imagine a person who's wounded, a person who's in need of medical help. Now, given that circumstances, how would he actually get rid of all of these embalmment that was already put on this person? And so now that would be very difficult. And then also the historical account says that there were soldiers who were guarding the tomb.
Yeah.
And so he would have to also overcome them. So this is very difficult. But what is interesting, before I close this section, is there is that article on the physical death of Jesus Christ.
Okay.
And this is from the Journal of the American Medical Society. And this is what it says, and I quote, "Clearly, the weight of historical and medical evidence indicates that Jesus was dead before the wound to his side was inflicted, and supports the traditional view that the spear thrust between his right ribs probably perforated not only the right lung but also the pericardium and heart, and thereby ensured his death. Accordingly, interpretations based on the assumption that Jesus did not die on the cross appear to be at odds with modern medical knowledge." I find that based on the historical document and even on the expert opinions from a medical perspective, now Jesus could not have survived. And it was testified evident that Jesus did, in fact, die in the risen cross.
So what you're saying is that we have good reasons to believe in the historicity of the death of Jesus, which has been proved by historians and also by medical professionals in today's world as well.
Exactly.
Which is an amazing thing, I think. And there's a book that says that, the word excruciating has been formed because it actually signifies the type of horrible death that a person would actually have to face if a person was hung on a cross. So that, the word excruciating would actually describe the worst, the horrendous, the painful experience that a person could ever have. And to think of that is actually a what do you say, a kind of a very difficult scenario to imagine by the human mind. And, so the second thing would be, the question that comes up in most people's minds is, why did Jesus have to die? And particularly, why was the cross used for the death of this person called Jesus Christ?
Now, if you go to the Gospel of John, actually in the English chapters itself, now, John the Baptist, as you would recall, is the one who had baptized Jesus. Now, when John the Baptist was there and he was baptizing, when he saw Jesus coming and approaching, now he said something which is very interesting in the first chapter itself. He says, "Behold, man, the Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world." Now, that is a very important point that we need to keep in mind. That why is it that John the Baptist describes or looks at Jesus and describes him as the Lamb of God? That has a very important connotation. Now, you go back to the Old Testament, you will find that, in the Old Testament, it talks about sacrifices. Talks about sacrifices that was offered to actually cleanse the sins that people would come to the temple, and that they would offer these sacrifices with the expectation that God would forgive them of their sins. So I think the first important point is that you need to keep in mind that Jesus was someone who was a sacrifice for the entire world. So I think that is the first point that comes to my mind. Sure.
So when we talk about the death of Jesus, so you just mentioned the word sin over there. Now, people have a very different idea of what sin is. So can you just help us understand what do you mean by sin? Or when people say, what is original sin? And why did Jesus have to die for the sins of many? And so that is a very important question that I feel that keeps going up, in some of our conversations.
Yeah. I think, well, I'm glad you brought the idea of sin, because in order to adequately answer the question of why did Jesus have to die, we need to also keep in mind the requirement for which Jesus had come.
Yeah.
If you recall, again, the same gospel that I mentioned, John chapter 3, verse 16, which everyone is familiar, actually says that for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, right? That whosoever believed in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. Now, that is a very important point to actually, to talk about, especially when we talk about why did Jesus have to die, right? But before that, it reminds us that, for God so loved the world. But why did he love? It is because he sees that there is something that, he sees us that we are in the path, a slippery slope, so to say. And sin, as you mentioned, is the problem that humanity as a whole faces. And that is why I think when you look at the concept of sin, we need to understand one important thing. That, the Bible tells us, for there is no one who is righteous. For all have sinned and have fallen short. But for those of us who may not be familiar with what sin is, and I think we need to understand sin as a matter of falling short of a particular standard. Now, if God is the creator, if God is the creator of the heavens and the earth, he has created us in his own image. And so he has also prescribed for us a standard by which we ought to live. But now, given that background, you and I are not able, or humanity as a whole, right from the beginning of the time when man was created, Adam and Eve, we fell, and we've fallen short of that standard. Now, that is what we see in today's context. Now, that standard is being seen in terms of the effect of the sins that we see in our own life, selfishness, and the unrighteousness, and so on and so forth, right? But technically, there are three important things that we need to keep in mind. One is that we need to understand unrighteousness as an effect of sin. Unrighteousness. God is righteous and we are unrighteous. It is because of the impact and the effect of sin. So unrighteousness, and then you also have the godlessness. And so there is no one who bothers to even care to ask, what would God want us to live and how would he want us to live. And then thirdly, I think it is actually lawlessness, where the prescribed law of God is not being upheld. And so we are living according to our own wishes and whims. And so that is something that we need to keep in mind. But before that, someone might even ask, how did it all begin? Yeah. And so it all began in the Garden of Eden. So chapter 1 of the book of Genesis 2 and 3 actually gives us a background of how did that happen. So Adam and Eve, having been created good, everything was good, everything was perfect. But Adam and Eve was given this commandment that they are allowed to eat from every tree, but not from this very tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And they disobeyed God. And as a result of that, you and I now being progenies of Adam and Eve back then. So, today when you really look at the concept and the idea of original sin, where did it come from? And I think, you see, today we are sinners not because we commit sins. We are sinners because we are in our very nature, our predisposition itself is to be sinful.
Yeah.
And so I think that is what I would say about the idea of sin from a scriptural point of view.
Yeah.
Maybe we can talk about the effects as well.
Yeah. And also, when people talk of original sin, people would like to say that, no, I was not born with sin. So, but one of the biggest evidence that, people would say is that you do not have to teach a child how to lie. In fact, you don't need to teach a child how to steal and so on and so forth. It just comes naturally. So there's something, originally corrupt or originally fallen about the human nature. And that is what many people would like to call the human predicament. And so I think that when we try to find a solution or, in other words, a salvation to bring us out of that solution, of that problem, I think now the next question would be, how can we come out of that problem? And how does Jesus actually bring about redemption at the cross? And also, how does forgiveness work? Because if we are sinners, it basically means that we have violated God in some way, which means that if God is a just God and he demands righteousness, how does the death of Jesus actually bring forth about the redemptive work and also forgiveness of sins? I think this is a vitally important point where people really have to consider to value the death of Jesus. Yeah,
true. See, we need to keep in mind that the Bible is very, very clear on this important point. And how is it that the cross of Christ offers us forgiveness? And as I just said a few moments ago about the fact that when you go back to the scriptures, you find that, in the Old Testament, it talks about sacrifices, and these priests would offer sacrifices. And I think when you speak of them, it also tells us about the fact that Jesus dying on the cross is to actually rescue us from that slavery. So that is the picture I would like to actually give. Now, before that, allow me as one of you actually unpack a little bit more about the effect of sin before I say how it actually rescues us.
Yeah.
See, the effect and the impact of sin. Sin, in other words, if we put it in our common day language, is corruption. Corruption not outside, but corruption within. And so the effect of sin begins with the separation that we have from God. Yeah, that is the effect. So when Adam and Eve disobeyed God, the result of that is the separation. That means they are no longer in talking terms. They are not able to see eyeball to eyeball. And so God is separated. And so now man is separated from God. That's the first impact and the first effect of sin. Secondly, man is also separated from himself. What do I mean by man is separated from himself? You find that the first result, especially after the fall, is the fact that the Bible talks about that when God came and discovered that, Adam and Eve had fell, what did they do? They were hiding. And you remember the question that God asked, Adam, where are you? It is not a geographical question. It is a question in terms of where are you in terms of your relationship with me? Have you disobeyed me? That is actually the reason behind the question. Not that God did not know. Can you imagine that God, being the creator of the heavens and the earth, not know where Adam and Eve were hiding? But the question was, where are they in terms of their relationship with God? So now, as a result of that, they found themselves to be naked. So they were ashamed of who they were in terms of the fact that they realized that they were naked. And so, ever since that time, as one of my mentors would say, that, the cosmetic industry began right there, where we have started to hide ourselves. We don't like looking at ourselves in the mirror. You're always ashamed. Yeah, so we try to make ourselves look good, smell good, and so on and so forth. So we don't like ourselves. So separation from ourselves. Thirdly, there's the separation from our neighbors. And that is why today you see that at the core of all the conflicts in this world is because man is separated from his neighbor. And then last but not the least, you have also a separation of man from nature, from the environment. And that is why you see, Romans chapter 8 talks about that the universe is groaning as if in childbirth. And so I think that is the backdrop of the effect of sin as a result of separation. And in that context, we find that the Bible talks about the fact that Jesus comes to rescue you and me from that very bondage. And that is why the word slavery, it's like procuring your freedom from the slave market of this world. And so Jesus provides for you and for me through the shedding of his blood. So that is why Jesus is a perfect, sacrifice, better than any other sacrifice. So that is one thing. And the other thing is, many a time people think that the death of Jesus on the cross is only to save humanity alone. No. The other important thing is that he rescues the universe as a whole as well. The universe is also waiting for that redemption to happen. Okay, right? And so that is why you will find that I think that as Paul would argue, that the universe is also groaning, waiting for liberation. So that is the first important aspect that we have. The other thing is that the fact that Jesus, when he died on the cross, you remember in the gospel it talks about the fact that the wrath of God was poured out on him. When he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? So the wrath of God, which basically meaning that when you and I have sinned, the price that you and I ought to have paid, which we cannot do it, but Christ paid it on your behalf and my behalf. So that is what I would say is what Jesus accomplished on the cross. And you see, you get that.
And also, there's another concept to it as well. The death of Jesus brings about forgiveness of sins. So I think when we talk about forgiveness, it's like people would actually think that Jesus, if he was really God, and if God, the Father wanted to, he could have just forgiven us. But the next question is, why did Jesus have to die on the cross? And then through that, how can we attain forgiveness? So I think there's a big misunderstanding when it comes to the concept of forgiveness as well. Supposing, depending on the type of sin that is committed, supposing I, for example, I was a murderer, I murdered your family, and you asked me and said, are you sorry for what you did? And I said, I'm utterly, just depressed about it, I'm sorry about it, there's nothing I can do. And if you just said, I forgive you, then how would you feel?
Yes, very true.
You're violent, I violated your family, I violated your, the person who you are. I dishonored you by doing that. So what would be required is actually me doing my part, so that somehow I can actually repay you for the damage that I've done to you. But the most amazing thing about, Jesus dying on the cross for our forgiveness is that, he took upon the wrath of God that you just mentioned. And also, he took upon all of the punishment that was rightfully ours, so that you and I can have that life. And just to think about it in that terms is I find it, it's such an amazing thing, because God's justice was actually served by the death of Jesus Christ on the cross. It was actually a demonstration of the honor of the person that was violated, or that of God. So God's honor was actually upheld at the cross, and that is exactly where Jesus, died. And actually, when we talk about forgiveness, it's not just that forgiveness is something that we just give it to people by grace, but rather when a person is actually really, really forgiven, his life changes. And that is something I find very amazing. The obedience that this person, the person who has accepted this forgiveness, when he realizes what forgiveness actually means, it is actually something that is kind of an inward change in him that is brought about by this forgiveness. Thus, as a result, there's a fruit of obedience to God. So a person who was once an enemy of God has now become reconciled with God and has now become a child of God. So I think that, this forgiveness is one of the most amazing things, and I think every person in the world ought to know it. But now, since that we've talked about, forgiveness of sins, now there's a very important thing that I think we need to discuss, is that, Christ died on our behalf. which was called, the penal substitution. And people would say that, okay, fine, Jesus died for my sins, Jesus died for the sins of the world, so on and so forth. But isn't that unfair when it comes to politics, when it comes to social injustices? So how does the role of Christ dying on our behalf actually play out in these things? Is it just that, a person can say, no, Christ has already forgiven me, I can go about sinning or carrying out all of these injustices? So I would like to know from you what you think about the death of Christ, forgiveness of sins, and carrying out different injustices, be it politics and so on and so forth. So,
well, that is a very good observation and a question, and I'm sure this is a question that we need to wrestle with. And I think, see, at the heart of what Jesus has accomplished on the cross is actually, you will find that it is liberating or freeing you and me from individualism. In fact, I would say that at the heart of, when you talk about the origin of sin, where does sin originate? It originates in our hearts. It is declaring to God freedom, autonomy, right? Autonomy. It's not about God anymore. It is about myself.
Yeah.
So now I want to live according to my own prescription, to my own liking, to my own wishing. And that is why I am rejected God. So that is individualism to the core. So now when you actually look at how this entire mechanism or the process of Christ liberating us plays out, you will find that He rescues us from that individualism, where we are now embraced and adopted into the family of God, where it is no longer about myself. So it is now, as you have just mentioned, that a person, when he is forgiven, there is some changes that takes place. Like Paul, that which I know to be good, that I do not do, but that which I know to be evil, that only I keep on doing. So who will rescue me? And so he says, thanks be to Christ. So what happens during that time? He is rescued from that selfish interest or that autonomy that his life is like what people say, that this is my life, that song which people say, this is my life, I live the way that I want. And now when a person is forgiven, he no longer sings that song, but now he's part and parcel of God's family. And so now when you expand it and actually look into the political scenario, political world, business world, and so on and so forth, and why is it that we see corruption there? You see, Christ did not come into this world to rescue structures. Christ has come to rescue you and me from the bondage of sin and evil. And then when you and I are rescued, then what happens is that you and I become part of these structures, be it in politics. Let's say if you are a politician, now when you are forgiven, when you have peace with God, then I'm sure that you and I now can become the salt and light of this world. So you will begin to actually influence and impact the world in which you find yourself living through, be it politics, be it business, be it anything. And that is why I think it becomes imperative for us to understand this very idea that we need to be liberated. Let me tell the story of Elie Wiesel. Elie Wiesel, who is a Jewish person, and he's a brilliant person who has written much. And in his story during the time when he was in the Nazis' camp, and he said that he was made to witness the hanging of 3 people, right? And in this process, he said that 2 people died instantaneously, except for the third one, who was much more leaner. And so he was being hung there in the gallows. And as they were being made to actually witness that scene, he said that he heard someone standing beside him asking this question, where is God? Where is God? In the midst of all of this. Now that's the very tendency that all of us will have, right? When we see something bad happening, we will always ask, where is God in the midst of all the corruption that we see? And here Elie Wiesel says that deep within himself, while he was asking that question, where is God, where is God? He said a question came, or an answer came, a response by saying, they're hanging in the gallows, where else? They're hanging in the gallows, where else? And precisely that is what has happened on the cross. When Jesus was hung there on the gallows, it was for your sake and my sake, rescuing you and me from that bondage. And so evil, as some may understand, is not something that is out there. Evil first needs to be done. And the moment we begin to realize that evil is first in here before it is out there, when that evil in here is being solved and being done with, and by you acknowledging what Jesus has done in the cross, then you and I can do a lot in contributing towards the good in wherever we may find ourselves, be it politics, be it in business, or be it in any domain that we find ourselves in.
Amazing, amazing. So what you're basically saying is that this people's substitution is there so that it'll change you first, it'll change me first, and then accordingly, when I have that right relationship with others, with myself, and then with God, I will actually be able to do so much more and also present this good news to people so that, we may have a better society. And that is what the better substitution does.
Exactly.
Amazing, amazing. Dear friends, we are unfortunately out of time, but we hope that you enjoyed our conversation. And like I said, if you want to have more conversations, if you're in Shillong or somewhere close by, you can always join us for a conversation in our office over a cup of tea. And if you have any questions or any inquiries or any topics that you would like us to discuss, please feel free to put it up in the comments, and we would be happy to discuss these topics as well. So thank you so much for your time, and we hope you enjoyed it.